Well, welcome back, everyone, to Learning to Read Sumerian Lesson 4 here at Digital Hammurabi. Today we're going to start looking at the verbal chain, the case elements. So if you remember from last month, the prepositions that were put on the nouns, on the ends of the nouns, like to or for or with, those prepositions also appear in a way in the verb. And so what we're going to do is look at the prepositions as they stand in the verb and how they relate to the case elements, the case endings that appear on Sumerian nouns. So we're going to quickly review the verbal chain, what it looks like in general. Then we're going to take a look at the case elements, what they are, and then the individual case elements, their form and their function, the dative, the comitative, the ablative, terminative, and the locative. Then finally, we'll look at the order that the infixes can show up in the verbal chain, and finally our vocabulary exercises and new signs. So, review of the verbal chain. So we've seen in the exercises and in the prior lessons, we've seen these verbal chains. So the verb nyar, to set, place. This is the verbal base, and then all of this represents the verbal chain. So these are individual elements in the verbal chain. Well, what do they represent? Well, ga here is a modal prefix, and we'll talk about this in a later lesson, but this sets the mode of the verb. Mu here is a conjugation prefix, so different from the modal prefix. Every verb has a conjugation prefix. There's mu, there's ba, there's b2, there's I3, and they all carry nuanced meanings, and we'll take a look at those in another lesson. Today we're going to be dealing with these. These are the case elements. This is a dative case element, ra. And we'll look at the different case elements that can show up in the Sumerian verbal chain in this position. Then you have a pronominal suffix, which we'll talk about when we actually deal with the verbal base, but this tells you the subject or the agent of the verb. So this one is be, and that means it's an inanimate object. And then finally we have the verbal base itself. So that's sort of how this thing works. You don't have to know or memorize any of the things that I just said. Just know that that verbal chain has a bunch of different parts to it, and we're going to look at each type in turn until you understand in general how the verbal chain goes together and its specific parts. But today we're dealing with the case elements. So what are they? The case elements in the verbal chain are those elements that refer the reader to case endings on the nouns in the sentence. So, in this sentence, lugal means king, do 11 means to say or to speak. If you remember from last lesson, ra is the dative marker, so it means to or for the king. Mu, from the previous slide, is a conjugation prefix. Na is the dative case element. So this na refers you to the ra on lugal. So this is a dative infix case element. This is a dative case marker. And what they're doing, instead of just putting the ra on lugal and saying mu, do 11, what they're telling you is, hey, by writing na, the verb is saying, hey, there's a dative in this sentence somewhere. Go find it. And it refers to this ra. Now, this is important in longer constructions because you could have several lines to a sentence. So this lugal ra could be separated by two different lines, or by two lines, from this verbal chain. And so this is useful because if there's a na, it would send you looking for this ra, if that makes sense. So these are essentially cross-references, right? The na is telling you this is a dative, and there's a dative in the sentence somewhere. So we would translate this, if lugal means king, ra is the dative meaning to, and this na is simply telling you that there's a ra out here somewhere. And do 11 means to stay or speak. This would be, he spoke to the king. And that's how that works. So let's look at the individual case elements. As we've just seen, the dative on the noun is ra, so lugal ra. But the infixed forms look like this. So let's go through them. 1CS means first common singular. 2CS is second common singular. 3CS, third common singular. 1CP is first common plural, second common plural, and third common plural. Now, I don't know if I've discussed this yet, and for those of you that have taken a foreign language before, first person, second person, third person. So first person is I or me. Second person is you, singular. Second person is you. Third person is he, she, or it. And then first plural is we or us. Second plural is you. And third plural is they. English doesn't have this, right? But if you were to say, let's say that you in English meant you if you were talking to a man, but ya meant you if you were talking to a woman. So you would be second masculine singular. Ya would be second feminine singular. But because Sumerian doesn't distinguish between masculine and feminine, we say it's common. So first common singular, second common singular, and so on. So if they wanted to say in the verbal chain, to me, the dative in the first common singular, this is the only weird form, the only weird way that this shows up, because it's not an infix. This goes on the front of the verb. Ma do three. Do three means to build. Ma do three would be he built for me. Ma do 11. He said to me. To me. So if you see ma at the front of the verbal chain, that's a dative first common singular, to me or for me. If you see ra in that verbal chain, like we did in the previous slide, ra is the second common singular dative, so to you. Na would be to him or her, or for him or her. Me would be first common plural, to us. We don't know what the second common plural form is, and the third common plural is ne, or ne, to them. So the most important forms that you need to remember, the most important is the third common singular. That's the one that shows up the most. But quite often you see the ma and the ra, the first common and second common singular. It's good to know that the me and the ne show up, and where to go to find them if you see them in the verbal form, to try to recall what they are. But really, the most common are the ma, ra, and na. So that's the dative. And remember, if you see na in the sentence, it's referencing you to the ra that's on the verbal form. It's cross-referencing it. It's telling you, go find the dative in the sentence. The comitative. Comitative means with, and as we saw last week, the comitative is formed by putting da on the end of a noun. So lugal da would be with the king. Well, in the verbal chain, da is the form, go figure, that is put in the verbal chain to tell you there is a comitative, another da, out there in the sentence. Now, in the dative, na meant to him or to her, right? So the form itself, ma or ra or na, tells you the person that it's referring to, right? To me, to you, to him. But da does not do that. Da is going to be the same throughout. So da could be referring to me or with me or with you or with him or with them, because it doesn't change its form. It's just da, 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 no matter where it shows up. However, or because of that, they will put a pronoun marker in front of it. So if you see the da here, they'll put an N in the position before the da in order to tell you it's with a third animate singular object. So him or her. So this would be with him. If this were a B, if this were mu'ub da'angub, that would be with it, an inanimate third singular. So mu'ub would be with it. So he stood with it. If this were mu'eh da, it would be he stood with you. If there were nothing, it would be he stood with me. So these pronouns will appear directly before the case marker, the case element in the verbal chain, and it tells you the object, what type of object that this preposition is taking. Is it taking a first person? Is it taking a second person? Is it taking a third person animate, a third person inanimate? That's what these are doing. The ablative. The ablative we saw in the last lesson, it takes the form ta on the noun, and it also takes the form ta in the verbal chain. No surprise there, no difficulty. The terminative, the ablative means from. Lugal ta would be from the king. Uru ta, from the city. And you would see a ta, perhaps, in the verbal chain that would refer you to the ta on the noun. The terminative, to or towards, is shethri. That's the form that appears on the noun. Well, the form that refers to it in the verbal chain is she. So very similar. So she refers to shethri. So if you see a she in the verbal chain, look for a noun with a shethri on it, referring to the terminative. And then finally, the locative. The locative on the noun means in, and the form that appears on the noun is a, and in the verbal chain, it is referenced by the form that it takes is ni. So the locative form is ni in the verbal chain. So in the sentence, a2, house, a is the locative. It appears on the noun. So in the house, dinger, enki, the god Enki, mu, ni, kufor. Kufor means to enter. So this sentence would mean, if we saw this ni, we might go looking for a locative. And here one is, right? This ni is referencing this a. So this is a locative reference. It's a locative case element. So it's saying, hey, there's a locative in the sentence somewhere. Go find it. So this sentence would mean Enki, the god, entered into the house. Enki entered into the house or in the house. One thing that needs to be noted is that ni could be written with just the N. This N could indicate ni. It doesn't necessarily have to have the Ni. So for example, mu un ku for could mean mu ni ku for. The N is the important part of that. What order will they appear in? This is a representation. You can find this in Thompson's grammar. The modal prefix is going to come first. Then the conjugation prefix will come next. You have to think of these as slots. Slots that these different elements can go in. So slot 1, slot 2, slot 3, slot 4, slot 5, slot 6. Right? So if a modal prefix appears in the chain, it's going to come first. Then a conjugation prefix. Then the dative. Then the slot here can be filled either by the terminative, the ablative, or the comitative. Any of those can show up here. Then the locative, then a pronoun, and then the verbal base. So this is the order that they'll show up in, and this becomes important as you advance in Sumerian grammar because you realize that some of these forms look the same, and the only thing that tells you, or one of the things that will clue you into the meaning, is what rank they're in, what position they're in. Now, I know we've covered a lot in the past 2 lessons, and I'm sure some of it is confusing. I would highly encourage you to come to the Google Hangouts where we go through each lesson, do the exercises, discuss the grammar. You can ask questions. It's very important, I think, to interact with people because listening to this lesson is obviously very useful, and you can play the lesson back any number of times. You can memorize these different forms and the meanings, but it's always good to interact with other people about a language so that you can ask specific questions in the moment to get clarity. So please join us for the Google Hangout when we discuss the grammar. Now, the vocabulary. Let's just go through it. Amar means calf. Nibruki is the city of Nippur. This is Enlil city. Very important city in Mesopotamian history. Kalam is land. An-ubda is a corner. And you would think, why in the world are you giving me the vocabulary word for a corner? It shows up a lot in royal inscriptions, so I wanted to make sure you had it. Limu-2 is 4, the number. Kar is a key. U4 is day. It can also mean when, but we'll discuss that later, and that makes sense, right? Ni-6 par 4 is the Gipar, or the cloister. And you'll see that in the inscriptions. Till 3 means to live. Dinger Nana is the god Nana. Ku3 is pure or holy. Babar is white. And then when you combine those, Ku3 Babar is silver. Gemetu is a female worker. U3 is and. Notice the difference here. U3, U4. It's important to remember the subscript number. U3 is and. Nam-til 3 is life. We'll talk about Nam in a later lesson. But Nam-til 3 is life. Ku4 means to enter. And Su-13 is to be long. Now the exercises. I'll read them out to you, and you can try them on your own. Again, feel free to email me to correct them, or if you have questions about any of this. So dinger enlil tu dinger ninyer tu su tu she 3, igi mushi bar. Now igi bar is a compound verb. To find the meaning of it, go to EPSD and look up igi space bar, igi bar. You'll find the meaning of that. But try to work out what that means. Lugal ra, dinger utu, mu na du 11. Lutu da, mu un da an gub. Kalam ta, dinger, mu ta nyen. Now, finally, we're going to take a look at our new signs. I've had several questions about this. I don't use EPSD's forms. I don't just cut and paste them because I'm not sure about the legality of that. So what I'm doing is drawing them myself. So I apologize for that. This is da, and this is atu. Now, da means side, and atu means arm. So you can see they're similar because an arm and a side are, obviously very similar. She3, Ning2, which is also the Nyar sign. Si, Im, which is also Ni2. Li, and Tar. Until our Google Hangout, resist poor scholarship. Always ask, how do you know that?